Welcome to Navigating Consumer and Family Law Challenges. Insights from SoCal's trusted attorneys.
Hello and welcome to Navigating Consumer and Family Law Challenges. Insights from SoCal's trusted attorney, Sara Khosroabadi. With a focus on consumer protection, Sara offers helpful, caring, and professional legal services and advice. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and in today's episode, we're talking about fighting billing errors, how the EFTA and FCBA safeguard you. Welcome back, Sara. It's been a minute since I've seen you.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, it has been.
Let's first talk about some common examples of electronic fund transfer errors that consumers might encounter.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's oftentimes misconstrued as far as like what electronic fund transfers are versus just everyday banking. So some common examples of the electronic fund transfer errors are with like ATM cards. So you've got your ATM, somebody pulled out money, duplicated your ATM card and pulled out money, or they used your ATM at a store that you're not familiar with. There's also potentially wire transfer issues. And then also you can see some transfers from bank to bank as well. So those are common examples of the electronic fund transfer errors.
Okay. And what are the specific consumer rights when it comes to errors in electronic transactions?
I think even after COVID, we stopped using cash, right? So
Yeah.
it was like during COVID, we couldn't use cash. So a lot of people have moved to using ATM and credit cards for practically all of their needs. And some of the rights these are old rights. These are not something that came up in during COVID. It's like 1978, I think, is when they were drafted. But it's regarding using ATM machines and using your ATM card, which I don't even think it's called that anymore, right? Like you have a little Visa check card or something like that.
Yeah, debit card, I guess.
Yeah, the debit cards, exactly. And then online payments. I mean, I don't know how many, I think every single one of my bills are paid through online payments. So I don't have to think about it, which is so amazing. But it leads to a lot of errors, and it leads to a lot of people not realizing that money is leaving their bank account when it shouldn't be. And so there's the EFTA, which is the Electronic Fund Transfer Act, and then also FCBA, which is the Fair Credit Billing Act. EFTA deals more with your bank, any kind of banking errors there are, and the FCBA, the Fair Credit Billing Act, deals more with credit cards. So they're two different things. But you can oftentimes fight, any discrepancies, whether with your credit card or your bank, especially if people are taking out money that doesn't belong to them, or if they're trying to transfer money, or sometimes even if you paid for something but you never got it. We have a lot of those scams that are happening recently where you paid for something, you're supposed to send it, you're supposed to receive it, and you never did. So it does help with those kinds
Got me.
of things.
They got me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. It was like $25. I'm not gonna lose sleep over it, but it was still like, I'm like, I know better than this. Come on, Kev, you can do better than that.
But multiply that $25 times even a million people, and it's a lot. It's a lot.
It is.
It ends up being an issue. So
Yeah, for sure. So how does the FCBA and EFTA work in conjunction to protect consumers in case of billing errors?
So they are two different statutes that allow us to tackle two different routes. So for instance, if it's a credit card that you're using, and again, not the Visa checking card, but actually a credit card, then you would be using the Fair Credit Billing Act. And they both similarly have like the same time frame. So you have 60 days to dispute. You have to dispute with the banking institutions. So those are similar, but the difference is the FCBA deals with just your credit cards, and EFTA deals just with your banking accounts and your ATM cards.
Okay,
so
they don't really ever work
differences.
together. They're separate things.
Yeah. So if somebody came in and said, I have a whole bunch of stuff on my credit card that I need to dispute, that would be the FCBA. Now that I'm thinking about it though, one thing that it could happen is you could come to me and say, my identity was stolen and everything is, in disarray. So not only my credit cards, but also they got information regarding my ATM, my bank. I would potentially file a lawsuit using both statutes, but they wouldn't be in conjunction. They wouldn't necessarily work together.
We've all had to dispute stuff before. We've all gotten, fraudulent stuff on our cards. I didn't even bother disputing that one thing because I'm like, I'm an idiot. I don't know why I thought I should order those shirts on Instagram. But it seems like for the most part, especially considering with credit cards, they're pretty good about like just getting it taken care of. Now, I haven't had anything like obscenely large, but we got our card compromised, my wife and I, once, and there was several $100s worth of gas that people got, and they were very quick to go ahead and just issue us a new card and take that off of there. Is that pretty much how you see it, or does it depend on the company or the time of year, or like what kind of factors into whether or not credit card companies are going to work with you or not?
Yeah, it depends on which companies you're working with. American Express, for instance, is really good about treating their customers really well and taking that into consideration. Chase has been pretty good about it too. I think what ends up happening is if it's a small amount, they can kind of stomach that. But when it starts to become thousands of dollars, that's when they push back on it. So if it's a small, $25 here, $35 there, or even, $100, I think that the banks are more apt to just say, it's not worth the trouble. Let's just give them the money back. It's when you start getting into the thousands that I think the banks are less apt to do it. And sometimes you get a really great person on the other end of the phone who really cares and wants to help you out. And sometimes you don't. All depends on the circumstances. And if you don't, maybe try calling back and seeing if you get somebody who can help out. But typically, what I see, I've had cases where it's as little as like $400. That was with Chime. They just did not want to give him any of his money back, especially after listening to the recordings that he had. They refused. That's not as typical, though. I think it's more the thousands, tens of thousands, things like that.
What are the typical reasons that, a claim like that would get denied?
You would think that they would have a list of reasons why it would get denied. To be honest with you, sometimes you don't have any reasons. They'll just say it's been denied. We've looked into it, and we're just not going to give you your money back. One that they really love using is it's past the 60 days. So that is they're really sticklers about the 60 days because, as you can imagine, they're the ones eating the costs of that, not necessarily the other companies. So the 60 days, it's 60 days from the statement. When you receive that statement. And even if you're like 61 days past that, they will not do the research or the investigation. And technically they're not liable at that point. So it's really important to make sure that you're doing that. But when I do see the denial letters, there isn't really a reason why. They just say we've done our investigation and we find you to be, at fault for using the card, or you're responsible for the debt.
Interesting. And what is there any recourse at that point?
Yeah, absolutely. So under EFTA and under the FCBA, if you do find yourself in a position where you are either a victim of identity theft or somebody, got into your accounts without your knowledge, or it could even be a family member, to be honest with you, who's used your card and you're like, I didn't give you permission to do so. You can always hire an attorney if you get to that point where they're not going to do it on their own, they're not going to do the investigation, they're not going to give you your money back. You can hire an attorney like me or consumer protection attorney, and then we would file the lawsuits under the FCBA and under EFTA. And there are a few different routes that you can take. It's the time and expenses that you've had to expend to get your money back, the actual money that, in the case of EFTA, if money was taken out of your bank account, that gets reimbursed to you because it's technically your money. And then also oftentimes with not necessarily EFTA, but with the FCBA, so the credit card one, it gets put on your credit report too. And so when it gets put on your credit report, you may have another lawsuit or a lawsuit in conjunction with the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Talking to an attorney, hiring an attorney to kind of step in and say what you guys are doing is wrong is usually the step that people have to take to get it fixed.
So what happens if I have, I don't know, let's just say I have like $2,000 on my credit card that I know was not mine, and that my card was stolen or used or whatever. They won't give it to me. I come to you. So how does the process unfold?
So typically what I look for is to make sure that you disputed the credit, and you can do it over the phone, doesn't matter if you
Yeah.
do it over the phone or in writing, but I typically want to see that you've disputed it within the 60 days. I want to see what investigation they've done. So if they've sent you back anything, if they've been calls, things like that are really important. And then after that, usually what ends up happening is I ask you to file, if it's identity theft and it's on your credit card or even on your ATM or bank account, I ask you to file for a police report too. That just oftentimes allows the police to know that things are happening as well, and that they need to be on the lookout for maybe patterns of this repeating. Then once I have all that evidence and I've reviewed it, if everything is there, I can end up filing the lawsuit, drafting a complaint and filing the lawsuit. And these end up in federal court. So it's kind of nice and clean. We can file that. And then basically at that point, we would be able to assert your rights. We get some information in the process, after we file the complaint, we'll ask for what's called discovery, and discovery will show what they did on their end to actually investigate the claims. And oftentimes we see that there's notes say person called in, we looked into it, there was nothing there, so we closed it out, which is not sufficient. The other thing that I do like to make sure that consumers are doing is, because the credit reporting comes into effect with the FCBA, it is important to check the credit reports and make sure that if you got hit with one credit card, you probably got hit with a couple other ones too.
Yeah.
So checking that credit report and making sure that all of your accounts are where they need to be and haven't been compromised is really important. Because again, we can tack on the Fair Credit Reporting Act with the FCBA and get your credit report fixed and make it so that you're not responsible for paying off that credit card bill that you didn't charge.
So is there an amount kind of that you will recommend? Just, hey, you might have to just eat this. Like, I mean, is there a certain amount of money that you just don't know if it's really worth going through the motions?
Yeah, I always like to say that it's important, $50 to one person is definitely different than $50 to another person. So
Good
it
point.
always matters. But as far as disputing it, I don't think there's a threshold. As far as maybe filing a lawsuit, I think you have to take into consideration how much of your time is going to be impacted by the lawsuit
Mhm.
and determine if that $50 or like you said, $25 is really going to be worth it. But like I mentioned before, I have filed a lawsuit on a $400 case. I don't think that that's too low. I think it's more about the egregiousness of the actions of the bank or the representative of the bank that'll tell me if that lawsuit needs to be filed. In that case, they had sent over recordings saying that the other company was going to give him the money back. And the banking institute still denied giving him his money.
Wow.
So it depends on, how bullheaded the banking institutes are going to be. And that's kind of where I will make a determination as to whether or not it's too small for our firm to kind of take on.
With that's an interesting, where you said that they didn't do anything. They didn't list anything that they did. I mean, do you think in that specific situation, did they do anything at all?
Somebody probably maybe looked into the videos or looked into it wasn't videos, it was recordings. I don't think that there's enough training on what needs to happen within these companies. I think there's a lot of turnover and
Mm.
it's really hard to train on compliance. And I mean, it's required, but I think that with the amount of turnover that ends up happening, the banks do end up making a lot of mistakes. And sometimes the employees get attached to that position and they think that it's their money that they're losing, and that's even harder. But I think that there definitely is a checklist of what they should be doing. At least the company should create that. Whether or not they're actually doing it on every one of them, it's hard to say. I can't imagine. I think I saw a statistic. I won't say the numbers, but I mean the amount of fraudulent activity that's happening in 2024. I will say 2024, and we're only 3 weeks into 2025, is pretty exorbitant. So I don't know that they have the capacity to look at every
Right.
single thing in as much detail as they should be.
What kind of things should they be doing?
Well, they should have for instance, on that one, the one case that I'm talking about, they have a recording there that says that, yeah, you didn't get the item that you were supposed to get. We're going to refund you. When that refund didn't happen, the bank should have, done a drawback of those funds. Typically, what ends up happening is your funds come out of your bank, and then when you dispute it, the funds just come back from that company. It's not like the bank is losing anything until you get to a certain point, right? So they should have just taken all of the funds that he was disputing and given that back to him and put it back in. And this one was an EFTA. It was out of his bank account. It wasn't a credit card. So they should have refunded him all of his money and listened to the recordings and kind of closed out that file. Instead, what they did was they opened up an investigation. I'm going to put those in quotes. Opened up an investigation, and then they gave him the portion of the money back, which is what they're supposed to do. And then after their investigation, when they closed it, they took the money and gave it to the company again. So they're supposed to be like our protectors, our middleman between the consumer and the business owners and the businesses, to make sure that the businesses aren't taking money or funds that they shouldn't be taking. So that's what they should have done, but definitely not what they did.
Obviously, if you believe you've been victim of fraud, first thing you should do is call your bank. Is there anything else that you recommend people do if they're like, oh, they see something on their statement, or they're concerned about something?
Yeah, I think that it's important that they check their statement every month. I know that that's tedious. There's apps like Mint, for
Yeah.
instance, that'll put all that information into a nice, coherent document, or I guess screen for you to look at. So things like that, I think it's important to look at your what the costs are, not just for planning purposes, but also to make sure that there aren't the $25 or the $50 that are coming out of your bank account that shouldn't be coming out of your bank account. I think the other thing is, if you can put it in writing, so if you call them, I would get an email and say, or an address, and say, where can I send this information to? Everything in writing is my motto. I think that it's best to put it in writing. If you don't, it's not the end of the world, but I always like to bring that evidence to a judge or to a jury and say, what else could this person have done? They followed all the steps and they still were a victim, and they're still being victimized. So anything in writing is really good. I also would put a freeze if it's credit cards, especially. I would put a freeze on your credit with the three: Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, just to make sure that nobody else can open up credit cards. It doesn't stop them from charging on those credit cards that they're already charging on, but it stops them from opening up new ones. Yeah. And then lastly, if you are seeing that there's an issue with your bank specifically, I don't know about you, but I would want to pull out my money from that bank account, maybe move it to a different, open up a different bank account and move my funds. Because if it happens once, and this is more so not the companies where you bought something and they didn't give you what they promised to give you, but if you're seeing money coming out of your bank account from ATM transfers or withdrawals, then I would open up a new bank account and put your funds into that new bank account at a different bank that will protect you. So those are just some thoughts on how to protect yourself.
Great tips. Well, thank you for joining us on Navigating Consumer and Family Law Challenges, insights from SoCal's trusted attorney with Sara Khosroabadi. To connect with her firm, visit kandhlawgroup.com, and please like and subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. Sara, always great chatting with you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.